Hi, it's Anne. Thanks for stopping by. We're going to be talking about texture today and how important it is to add that sort of added physical dimension to our junk journal elements. I know I don't think there's going to be anything in here that you haven't already seen before, but I'm hoping to get you to look at texture in a slightly different way. You might have a project that seems uh, literally a little flat, a little boring, a little blah. And so often, if we just think, how can we add texture to this layout, to this junk journal element, to this page, adding a little texture can just really bring things to life. Texture is the thing that we can't get from our phones. When we're scrolling all day on our phones, we're touching our screen, but we're feeling the same flat surface. When we're working with a junk journal, we can touch it. There's just things that we can feel that help us interact with the piece you know in so many new ways. And it's really exciting, I think, to have some dimension, to have some touchability in our journal pages. We touch them when we write in them and record our thoughts, and then as we look back through, how nice it is to be able to feel different dimensions. Not going to try to get into neuroscience or sensory receptors or any of those things. We just know that it's different when we can touch things and they feel intriguing to us. It stimulates us. It helps us interact with our project and our art in a different way. So I have lots of different samples. I just kind of went through my own stash for examples of texture that I want to talk about. Again, it's not going to be anything I'm sure that you haven't tried before, but you might not have thought of it specifically in the texture category and how important that is. So let's just get started on that. The very first, I'm bringing in my scratch paper like I like to do. The very first easiest way, I think, to add texture to our junk journal elements is manipulating the paper itself. And these are all things you do, but start thinking about them and valuing the texture. How can we manipulate our paper? We can crumple it. There's so many different things. I'm just going to go through those examples. Crumpled paper is one of the easiest ways to add texture. And here is an example. I use this kind of paper all the time. You're not able to feel it here, but I can feel that there's a wonderful, almost not quite a leathery feel to it, although it does sort of look like leather. There's a visual texture to it, but I can feel those crumples. I can feel the folds where the paper goes up and down, and I've accentuated that with a little bit of ink. I'm going to very quickly show you this technique. I'm not going to be doing techniques all the way through because it would just take too long, but here's just a little scrap of just packing paper, and this can become a journal cover. It can become background on a tag. It can be a topper. I use this kind of paper so frequently. And you just crumple it and you smooth it out again. And look at this texture that you have added. I'm going to grab a little bit of ink and let that come to pop up at us. And I know I will use this for something. Just a little bit. This is vintage photo distress ink. Just a light coating here. If you're new to junk journaling, you might not have seen this technique before. Some people like to put a little bit of lotion or hair conditioner on the paper too to soften it up, and that can bring up some of those fibers and make it even more suede-like. But this is one of the most basic ways to add texture to your junk journal pieces. You can put this over a piece of cardstock, glue that down, and have a wonderful background or a wonderful cover. Easy by crumpling paper. If you have an embossing machine, don't forget to use it for your junk journals. It is not something everybody has. I'm a card maker, so I use it for that. But I do sometimes try to remember to put embossed paper in into my journals out of my embossing machine as well. This is something that gives a nice little background to a book plate or something like that. You can do this same technique with the distress ink. Here's another piece that was in my card making file. Oh, and here's another one. This one might even show up a little bit better. If I wanted to use this and really accentuate that texture, I would just lightly pull my distress ink pad over that surface too, and that comes up. We have visual texture as well as something that just really invites you to reach out and feel it. It can be just a really nice interactive feature for your journal. What about pleating your paper? Again, this is another way to manipulate your paper. We like ruffles, don't we? You know, these can be so nice along an edge or at the top of a tag. This is just a long piece of sewing pattern that I cut into a strip, and I just put a little strip of thin scrap decorative paper on top and sewed down the middle. And I just did that sort of pleating. And it doesn't add a lot of bulk. It is somewhat fragile, so I don't think I would put this on the cover because of the thin nature of the tissue paper. But it adds a nice dimension. It makes you want to go in and touch where those folds are. And pleated paper really can add a nice feature. It's nice at the top of a tag too, to use as a tag pull. So that's pleating. Even just tearing paper, and we tear paper all the time, but I think one of the reasons we tear it, we like that ragged edge. One of the reasons we like that ragged edge is that it invites us to come in and feel what we, this is just a little tag from my stash, but I love this torn edge. It's no different than the myriad other torn edges that are in my stash, but there's something about that exposed core that we get from that torn edge that makes us, there's a slightly different, there's bumps on there. It's the paper fibers that are sticking up when it has gone through the trauma of the tear. It's a gentle trauma, I will say that, but tearing our paper and then distressing that tear really gives us a nice element of texture. If your piece is not looking very lively, just try tearing some paper and adding that in. Curling paper can be wonderful, and that kind of goes along with layering too. You saw me work on this a couple of weeks ago when I was at my friend Connie's. There's a lot of layered papers here, and I've just sort of curled this thin tissue paper around the edge. It's folded up, it's curled, it adds texture, and there's layers of it. So we can come in and, you know, we have layers with this little little lace brooch that Connie put on here. I love that she called it a brooch. But you know, adding layers, there's more than meets the eye there. You want to reach out and touch this. That's not something you get through a digital screen. So manipulating the paper itself is just a really, really good way to begin to introduce texture to your pieces. So we can think about how to do that. Napkins. Napkins are a great way to crumple. Napkins and tissue paper. I don't think you can see this very well here, but here's a piece of tissue paper that I've glued onto a playing card, and I've scrunched it up a little bit so that it is slightly bumpy. It's not really bumpy, but when you feel it, there's a difference there. It's not perfectly smooth, but it's still nice and flat, so it's not going to add extra bulk. So manipulate that paper and see what kind of textural interest you can add. What's another one? I have all of my different little pieces of scratch paper here. Corrugated cardboard. This is something that comes manipulated to us through the manufacturing project, but especially on covers. Corrugated cardboard is a lovely, lovely way to add texture to your junk journal piece. Here's a little, I think this is something out of my to-do box. I think I needed to, I was in the process of turning this into a pocket, but I just glued a little strip of corrugated cardboard here to this piece. I don't know what I was going to make out of this. Actually, as thick as that is, that might have been something I was in the process of making into a journal topper. With this one, I left the flutes of the corrugated cardboard exposed. Sometimes I run them through my embossing machine. You could do the same by just spraying some moisture on it and maybe rolling a wine bottle or a kitchen pie crust rolling pin over it to squish down those flutes. The little bumpety tubes there are called flutes. I usually keep several pieces from cardboard boxes around to begin to make into new textural elements. I usually just cut off, the end flap of a box, spray one side of it with water, and let it sit maybe about 10 minutes, and then begin to peel that top layer of cardboard off so that you expose the flutes, because that's where the texture really shows up. And there's some boxes have very small flutes, some have larger flutes. There's a lot of variety. When I peel off that top, I usually leave some of that top layer of the cardboard there, because again, that varies the texture. Here it's flat where that top layer of cardboard was, but I exposed the flutes here. I distress it with a little ink, and I often take a little bit of gesso so it kind of looks like it's paint or something in there, like it's a part of an old exposed wall that you've, beginning your demo, and you've ripped the wall down and you're looking at that construction material below. It always has an interesting story to tell. Corrugated cardboard, again, is really, really super to use on journal toppers because it is thick, but you don't mind that if it's on the front of a journal. This is a little topper that I had sitting around, and I put it on this little small little journal just the other day when I was putting it together. I thought this would be a nice place to write down things that are unexpected. There are many unexpected things in life, aren't there? But I just used the background, used for the background a piece of corrugated cardboard. And I do that a lot. You've probably seen other pieces of corrugated cardboard I've used. But it adds texture. It's you pick it up and you just kind of want to go, oh, there's just something very, very satisfying about that sort of interaction. So corrugated cardboard, if you want to, let's see, I had another piece over here showing how that worked nicely with die cuts. And I don't see that right now. I'm going to have to search for it. I'll be right back. Of course, it was right here. But I sometimes, as I mentioned, I take a little piece of treated corrugated cardboard, or I've taken off that front top layer and done a little gessoing. I run it sometimes through my die cut machine just to squish those flutes down. Get up here and see if you can kind of see that. So those flutes are much more narrow than something like this. Run it through the die cut again with, with one of your dies, and look at this pretty, pretty leaf that I cut out of there. And I could just use the negative space too on the cover of a fall journal or something. This is flatter, so I could use this inside, but die cuts out of corrugated cardboard are really nice elements. And again, they give you that same invitation to touch, to feel, to interact with your piece. So that is corrugated cardboard. I'm getting quite a bit of a stack here. The next thing to consider to add, if you want to really zhuzh up your journal pieces, is add fiber elements. And by fiber, I mean you can add fabric, lace, gauze, or cheesecloth, any kind of stitching, ribbon. These are all fiber elements that once you add them in, I don't have it on here, but, twine, a little bit of, twine or something. This is on a journal topper, but it's, part of a tag here. That's all something that adds texture, that makes things just, it just improves the interactability of your piece and makes your whole experience just really satisfying. Let's look at a few examples. You see lace in journals all the time. Here's one where I put some linen in. I think I did this one on camera, but I added a little combined lace and linen, and I pulled the threads off the sides of the linen before I put it down here, and just added, the extra texture of that little bit of fringe around the outside. I added stitching is great. We're used to doing lots of machine stitching. Maybe this will make you appreciate the stitching you do. It's more than just a way to hold the paper together, but it does add, a way for you to want to touch, to feel. It improves the texture of your piece. Lace is always nice. I mentioned gauze and cheesecloth here. You see a lot of tips about cheesecloth. Honestly, I don't like to, what am I getting? I don't think I've ever gone to the fabric store and purchased a yard of cheesecloth, but what I have used is rolls of gauze, like bandages. Sometimes you can find really old ones, or sometimes it's a partially used one in a thrift store. I would never use used medical waste, of course. But if you have some on a roll that hasn't been used yet, it's perfectly fine. Easy to coffee dye. Just dunk it in a cup of coffee, put it out to dry, and then you have this interesting little netting. Gauze and cheesecloth is particularly good as if you have any kind of like a beach journal or anything with seashells. It has that sort of fisherman's netting kind of look to it. So that's my tip on if you have an idea where you're thinking cheesecloth or something as a backing, try that medicinal gauze instead. Snip off a little bit, and that's all you need. For stitching, it goes beyond machine stitching as well. This is a piece, I honestly don't like this very well. I don't. It's the outside part is just a little bit too gaudy for me. I don't know. I might find some place to use it, with the spatters and all that. But I was really using it to practice what it was like to embroider on. This would probably be a journal card or maybe a topper. And the embroidery actually worked pretty good. I think that my friend Connie is probably a lot better about this than I am. The technique of embroidering on paper, you have to be careful where your holes are, and sometimes you punch your holes in advance and then go in and put your needle in and out of where you have poked your holes, because unlike fabric, you can't jab your your needle in and out and have the holes disappear. There's there's a permanence to the holes that you make, so you want to be sure you know where your needle's going. But I liked this idea. This, I might be able to do something, with this bright color on the outside. This is another example of tearing, though, and the texture that adds. So this is not without its textural elements. But I wanted to show it to you just as an idea. If you have some embroidery floss and you feel like doing some hand stitching on your paper, do it. What's great to do hand stitching on is a map. If you have a map that has, a special place where you're going on vacation, or you're remembering home, or you're remembering somebody who lives far away, take a map that has that location and do, maybe some stitching of a heart around it. Think of that as a great way to add texture. So those are our fiber elements. Other embellishments. What about metal? Every time you add metal, it's a different sort of surface. It's a different sort of sensory experience. Anytime you add any kind of a die cut, there's a little bit of dimension to that die cut that makes you want to touch it. This is a little die cut that's nice here. Here's a little die cut frame. I kind of like to layer those up as a textural element in my journal toppers. This is making me want to use this and put this on a topper. I will do that soon. This piece that I think I showed you before, this is metal. This is inside of a margarine tub that I ran through my embossing machine. It's metal. It's a different experience to touch that. You just want to get in there and feel that. But so many of the little items that are just part of our everyday crafting stash. This one again, just adding a paper clip, adding some kind of a decorative paper clip is nice. Adding a staple, adding a brad, adding an eyelet at the top of your tag. That adds metal. That can always improve the textural experience that you have with your journals. So there's that. And finally, and this might be when we talk about adding texture, we might think of this first. I'm thinking of it last because there's so many other things that are a little bit simpler and a little less messy that I go to first. But texture paste really should be on our list. And let me see, how are we doing time-wise? Yeah, I think I can just do a little, why don't I go back to this little card, and I'm going to bring in a little bit of texture paste. I'm all for the DIY things, and I think that people have had really good luck with DIY texture paste. I am not really one of those people. I have found, I'm digging for a, there we go, I'll use this. Is that one I want to use? I think I want something a little bit curvier. My experience with texture paste has been that when I have tried to make it myself, you can make it like with baby powder, and you can Google texture paste and get all kinds of ideas. But I'm looking for my little texture spreader here. Well, I seem to be losing all kinds of things on my desk, don't I? I'm going to have to hunt for that before I come in and do this. Of course, it was right here. My experience with making my own texture paste has been that it's always been a little bit too watery, or it gets too gummy or too gritty. So as much as I complain about always having to buy Ranger or Tim Holtz sorts of I don't know if this is Tim Holtz per se. I guess this is just Ranger, although he's certainly affiliated with them. I actually do buy the texture paste. A little goes a very, very long way. I mean, it's like using a dab of toothpaste. I like that one. I have another one that I got on sale at Joann's, R.I.P. Joann's, a Heidi Swap texture paste, and this works pretty good. It's maybe a little more runny than this, so of the two, I think I like this one better. But I'm just going to show you how easy it is to use this. And why don't I bring a little piece of background paper here. You do want to wash up quickly, but this is something, it's almost the texture of, I put a styling paste in my hair after I blow dry it, and it's just a little bit thinner than the texture of that kind of waxy paste, But one thing to remember, if you have texture paste, I think this is my biggest message here. If you have texture paste and you haven't used it, use it, because you know what? It dries up. This is a tip I got years ago from Lindsay Weirick, the frugal crafter. She talks about, us having big stash supplies of our various mixed media things. And she says, use what you have. Don't hoard those supplies, because they will dry up, and then that's money wasted. So I took that to heart, and all I'm doing is just loading up this little piece, or this little tool, and I'm just spreading it. Don't know that this is going to show up all that well, but it is going to give us a little bit of texture, so you can kind of see. Now, we don't want to touch this for a while. You can do some interesting inking and such around the edges of that. Here's one that I did not long ago. I was sort of experimenting with doing some texturing on a little journal card, and then I went in and just dribbled a bunch of diluted distress ink. And when you dribble on top of it, the texture paste itself is moisture resistant, so you can wipe that off, and all the ink just stays behind it, but the top of your image actually wipes clean. So this doesn't, it's not a whole lot of contrast, but there is an interesting amount of texture there that we can go back in and touch. So use your texture paste. If you have it, use it. I am going to wipe off my tool and wipe down my stencil. Just as I'm finishing up here, I will go and wash this because you don't want this stuff to dry. Check out how other people, though, have done a DIY texture paste, because it might be something that works really well for you. For me, I've had a hard time, and I'm sure it's user error, but I've had a hard time, when I put down my my stencil and I've smeared the DIY texture paste on it. It's just, it kind of seeps around the edge of that that aperture, that opening of the stencil, and kind of makes for kind of a distorted stencil. So for me, for right now, I mean, as you can see, I have a long ways to go before I use this up. So so that's not going to break the bank if I keep using this. In fact, it'll keep me from letting my material spoil. So let me just sort of bring these around. These are just a few things that you can do to add a lot of really interesting texture, interesting sensory interaction with your junk journal pieces. And I hope you pay attention to texture. We'll see you soon. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.